Okay, let's unpack this. We have a source here, a fascinating article that really throws down a gauntlet about the future of business. And not just the distant future, but like right now future.
That's right. We're diving into an article by Swiss economist Dr. Pooyan Ghamari, provocatively titled Transform or Fade, Business as Media Company. And it makes a claim that's, well, it's pretty stark, hard to ignore.
Stark is an understatement, yeah. He argues that businesses have, what, about 3 years? 3 years to fundamentally become media companies, or essentially, well, face extinction. That's quite the ultimatum.
It absolutely is. He's basically saying that the core competitive advantage is shifting. It's moving away from the old stuff like capital or just having a better product
Right.
towards something much less tangible, but he argues far more powerful: attention, trust, and, real audience engagement.
So for you listening, maybe you're leading a team, building a company, perhaps thinking of starting one, or even if you're just trying to understand these big economic shifts. This deep dive is about tackling that bold, maybe slightly unsettling idea. We're going to pull out the core arguments, the examples, the why, directly from this source to really get what he means by transformation and why he thinks the old ways are just crumbling so fast.
Yeah, it's a perspective that could genuinely reshape how you think about value creation and, frankly, survival in today's market.
Okay, let's jump right into it then.
Let's do it.
So the source kicks off with this really arresting idea, this bold premise of extinction within 3 years. He talks about the business landscape undergoing an invisible revolution. What does he mean by invisible?
Well, he uses that phrase, I think, because while businesses see the surface stuff, new tech popping up, new competitors, many aren't seeing the fundamental, tectonic shift happening underneath.
Okay.
The core argument isn't just that, having some content isn't nice to have anymore. He's saying it's becoming existential. If a business isn't actively evolving to educate, captivate people, build trust through media, through its content, extinction is imminent. That's the claim.
And he's really specific on the timeline, right? Not vague, but within the next 3 years.
Exactly. And importantly, he frames it not as some slow, gradual trend you can adapt to over time. He calls it an accelerating wave.
An accelerating wave.
Yeah, the forces driving this change are speeding up, not slowing down, which makes it urgent.
Which naturally leads us to the why. If this is an accelerating wave, something must be breaking down the traditional defenses, the things businesses used to rely on. The source talks about the collapse of old moats.
Right. The old playbook, it was all about building high walls around your business, wasn't it? For decades, your edge came from having, say, huge amounts of capital or maybe exclusive connections, proprietary patents.
Those are the barriers to entry.
Exactly. Those were the moats that kept competitors out, gave you breathing room.
But he's saying those have lost their power.
Pretty much completely, according to the source. He points to things like, well, the obvious ones. The rise of AI, ubiquitous open source platforms, cloud services everywhere. These have just dramatically lowered the cost and the complexity of actually building something, iterating on it, distributing it. AI, especially, can do things faster, cheaper, automate stuff in ways we couldn't imagine before.
So you get this paradox he highlights.
Yeah.
It's never been easier or cheaper to build something, a product, a service.
Right.
But it's never been harder to actually stand out.
Precisely. He talks about infinite markets meaning, effectively, infinite competition. If building the thing itself is becoming commoditized, your competitive edge can't just be that you built a thing.
Right.
This is what he calls an existential reckoning for businesses that are still stuck in that old model.
Okay, so if the traditional moats, features, code, capital are becoming less unique, less defensible, what is left? What's actually rare and valuable now? The source is very clear on this point.
Yeah, he says it boils down to what cannot be easily cloned or copied. You can replicate a feature list, right? You can reverse engineer code. Capital moves around. But what you absolutely cannot replicate overnight is genuine attention from the right people, hard-earned trust, and a true following and audience that actually cares about what you do and say.
And that kind of relationship, that following, it's not built with a single ad campaign or some viral stunt, is it?
No, not at all. He really stresses that these things, attention, trust, following, they're the result of relentless, authentic value creation delivered consistently over time.
Through what?
Through media, through stories, through education, providing real insights, building a community, offering thought leadership, doing that consistently through your channels.
And here's where it gets really interesting because he makes this quite bold claim. The most valuable companies moving forward won't just be the ones with the best product specs.
Right.
They will be the ones that own the most meaningful relationships with their audiences.
Exactly. And in this view, content isn't just, a function of marketing anymore. The source argues that content is the product in many ways. It is the distribution channel, and often it's becoming the entire business model itself.
Which brings us neatly to the core strategic imperative he lays out. Every business needs to start thinking and acting like a media company. It's a big mental shift, isn't it? Moving from content as marketing to seeing content as the moat.
It really is. And he uses examples like Gymshark or Tweet Hunter, Outrank. He doesn't frame them primarily as like product development geniuses. He calls them content engines.
Content engines.
Yeah, their real strength, he argues, comes from the communities they've built, the expertise they share, the conversations they lead.
And according to the source, their success wasn't really about outspending competitors on ads or just having slightly better features.
No. He argues they won by out-educating their audience, by out-engaging them, and ultimately, he says, by out-loving them, building that genuine connection.
And this leads to what he calls the new business physics. Sounds quite fundamental.
Yeah, he uses that term business physics because he sees these as kind of unavoidable forces shaping the modern market now.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first, distribution costs are effectively zero. Your voice, your content, can potentially reach millions instantly online, huge potential reach.
Right.
But second, competition is infinite. There are, 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 other things vying for that exact same slice of attention.
Right. Noise everywhere.
Exactly. And so, third, the real moat, the defensible advantage, becomes trust and attention. And crucially, these can only be earned over time. You can't just buy them like you could buy ads or patents.
So these forces kind of dictate survival now.
That's the argument. You have to play by these new rules.
Okay, so if that's the new physics, how do you actually navigate it? How does maybe a more traditional business start transforming into one of these media-centric companies? The source breaks it down into 3 core pillars for this strategy.
Yeah, 3 key pillars. The first one is foundational. Educate with genuine insight.
Okay.
This means you need to share real knowledge freely, not just push sales messages or marketing fluff. Your content, he says, must genuinely make your audience wiser, more capable, more successful.
Even if they never buy from you.
Even if they never buy from you, that's the quote. Because that's how you build that first crucial layer of trust. Giving value without immediate expectation.
Okay, so value first. That leads to pillar 2.
Pillar 2 builds on that. Convert with community and free value. So beyond just educational articles or videos, the source talks about giving freely in more tangible ways.
Like what?
Like creating useful tools, maybe free resources, templates, or actively building communities around your area of expertise. Let people experience the value you provide. Let them benefit from your ecosystem before they even think about becoming a paying customer.
He calls this strategic generosity, right?
Exactly. Strategic generosity. He sees it as planting the seeds for those really strong, long-term relationships.
So you educate to build trust, you give freely to show value and build community.
Yeah.
What's the third pillar then? How does the product fit in?
Pillar 3 is upsell to product with integrity. So after you've done the work in pillars 1 and 2, you've educated, you've built trust, you've shown value, maybe fostered a community, then the actual offer of your paid product or service should feel like a completely natural, logical next step.
Not a hard sell.
Not a sales pitch, as he puts it. If you've laid the groundwork properly, the conversion isn't forced. It becomes an organic outcome of the relationship and the value perception you've already established.
It really does sound counterintuitive to a lot of traditional business thinking, which often starts with the product, then figures out the marketing later. The source seems to draw this clear line, this great divide between what he calls media companies and traditional product companies. He even offers this really provocative idea: ship stories before features.
Yeah, and the why behind that is fascinating. He argues that stories are just fundamentally more powerful than feature lists for building long-term value and connection. Features appeal to logic, maybe.
Right.
But stories create emotional connection. They build a sense of collective identity around your brand or idea. They shape how the market perceives you in a way that just listing specs never, ever will.
He uses the example of the ALandPlatform. That's a real estate and economic development hub. You'd normally think their success hinges on, I don't know, the number of listings or some clever tech feature.
You would. But the source says their biggest wins, their real traction, came from deliberately building a trusted content ecosystem.
So what did that involve?
Things like providing really deep market analysis, hosting insightful webinars people actually wanted to attend, sharing compelling investor stories, putting out transparent newsletters with real data. It wasn't just about the transactions or the platform's tech. It was about becoming the trusted source of information in their niche.
And that content-first approach that built relationships and advocacy that maybe the product alone couldn't achieve.
Exactly, which ties directly into what he calls the myth of the invisible brand.
Ah, the invisible brand myth. What's that?
It's the warning, basically, that companies can have a genuinely superior product, they can have great funding, cutting-edge tech. But if they don't actively earn an audience, they still fail.
Why?
Because they mistake advertising reach for genuine connection. They confuse putting out noise with creating value. They think shouting louder means they're being heard and trusted. But in today's world, flooded with options, being unseen, being ignored is the default state.
So survival requires mastering being seen.
And crucially, being believed, being trusted.
Which brings us right back to the economics of attention and the incredible value of trust in this new landscape. It reminds me of that Herbert Simon quote, "A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention."
Absolutely spot on. No matter how brilliant your product is or how sophisticated your tech stack, you are fundamentally competing for mere seconds of human focus in an incredibly crowded, noisy world. Seconds. The companies that win, he argues, are those that figure out how to command attention, how to curate it, and how to sustain it, not just for a campaign, but consistently over years.
And within that battle for attention, trust is positioned as, what did he call it? The last uncopyable asset?
Yeah. Because there's just no shortcut to it, is there? You can't buy genuine trust. You can't clone it from a competitor. It has to be built painstakingly, day by day.
How?
Through transparency, through consistency in what you say and do, and through demonstrating genuine care for your audience's needs, their success, their problems.
This feels especially critical in those high-stakes sectors, right? Like finance, real estate, major investments. Places where information isn't always symmetrical and the customer is taking a significant risk.
For sure. That ALand example fits perfectly here again. The source highlights that their clients weren't just investing millions because the properties looked good on paper.
Why then?
It was because the insights, the content, the ongoing guidance they receive over time had built this deep reservoir of trust. Trust in ALand's expertise even in an unpredictable global market. He argues that this kind of content-driven trust is becoming the ultimate differentiator, especially on a global scale.
Okay, so if this transformation is as necessary and as urgent as the source claims, what does it actually look like on the ground? How does a business, maybe one starting from a more traditional base, actually begin this journey? He offers 5 key steps, right?
Yeah, he frames them as fundamental shifts in thinking and operation. First, you have to redefine your core mission. Stop thinking of yourself as just, say, a software company or a manufacturing company. You are now a media company that happens to deliver software or products.
Wow, okay. That's a big mental shift right there.
What's next? Second, you need to build a dedicated content engine. And this isn't just rebranding your marketing team. It means bringing in people whose core skill is storytelling, education, content strategy people, focused on translating your expertise and value into compelling narratives and useful resources.
So it's about creating value through information itself, not just promoting the end product.
Precisely. Third, he stresses, cultivate community before you chase massive scale. Don't just broadcast your message out to millions. Use your media channels, your blog, your social media, your newsletter to actually engage in dialogue, provide support, build real relationships with your early audience.
Build that loyal core first. Get the foundation right.
Exactly. Fourth step, embrace radical transparency. Where possible, share your processes. Talk openly about challenges you face, maybe share relevant data. In a world that's often skeptical, this kind of openness builds immense credibility and trust.
Okay, makes sense. And the 5th step?
Fifth, find ways to turn your customers into contributors. Create opportunities for your audience to co-create content with you. Maybe share their own success stories using your product or ideas. Let them become active participants in your brand's ecosystem.
That deepens their connection and provides that powerful, authentic social proof.
Right. It makes them part of the story.
And underlying all of these steps, the source keeps coming back to the urgency. This isn't framed as a nice idea for, some time down the road.
No, definitely not. He hammers home that 3-year timeline as being critical, and he sees AI specifically as just pouring fuel on this fire, accelerating the shift even more.
How so?
Well, AI is getting great at commoditizing the building of products, right? It can automate support functions, it helps democratize distribution. But what it doesn't automatically do is build authentic audience connection, genuine attention, or deep trust.
If anything, maybe the opposite.
Exactly. By potentially flooding the world with even more generic AI-generated content or noise, it actually makes genuine human-driven insight and trust even more scarce and therefore even more valuable.
So the claim is the next 3 years are going to be incredibly challenging, maybe brutal, as he says, for companies that don't make this fundamental shift.
Brutal is the word he uses, yeah. He believes they won't necessarily fail because their product suddenly becomes terrible. They'll fail because they simply fade into invisibility.
Invisible.
Yeah, in a world that doesn't see them, doesn't notice them, or fundamentally doesn't trust them, their failure won't be bad luck. He argues it will be a direct consequence of failing to adapt to these new business physics.
But on the flip side, he also frames this as a massive opportunity, right?
Oh, absolutely. He sees the playing field, at least in terms of reaching an audience and building influence, as being more level than it's ever been. The chances there for those who are willing to commit.
Commit to what?
Commit to leading with value, commit to educating generously, commit to building that trust consistently at scale. The cost isn't necessarily about having the deepest pockets anymore. It's about relentless commitment, authenticity, and playing the long game, and the potential reward. Category dominance, real impact, and enduring relevance.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, the core argument is, well, it's undeniably challenging and very clear. In this accelerating wave of change, the source contends a business must transform into a media company, or it truly risks becoming irrelevant, essentially becoming invisible.
Yeah, the key takeaway we've really pulled from this article is that in this new era, building that trusted audience, earning genuine attention through consistent, valuable content that's not just a marketing tactic anymore. It is the fundamental competitive advantage. It's what will determine who survives and who thrives.
And this deep dive hopefully has pulled out those core insights, the why behind this shift, the how to navigate it, and the examples provided in the source to give you, our listener, a clearer picture of this potential future business landscape he's describing.
It definitely forces you to step back and consider what truly underpins business value and longevity when the act of just building things becomes increasingly commoditized.
Right, because in a world where, as the source suggests, your content is becoming your legacy and your audience is effectively becoming your future, it leaves you with a final thought. What story does your business need to start telling today to ensure it's remembered and relevant tomorrow?